With the thought of Final Fantasy XV constantly on our minds, that got us thinking about one of our favorite aspects of the series, summons. Also known as Eidolons, Aeons, and Guardian Forces, these come in many shapes, sizes, and long cinematics, and we've always had a profound love for them. Now, we are going primarily off of our personal experiences with the franchise, which consists of Final Fantasy VII through Final Fantasy X mostly. So, if you don't see your favorite on the list, make sure to comment and tell us what your favorite summon is, and why. It's the best. Now, without further ado, here's our top 10 list for favorite Final Fantasy summons of all time. Usually when you think of summons, you might think of a gigantic monster that can cause death and destruction, and you wouldn't be wrong, 9 of our 10 picks are exactly that. But one little ally kept popping up in our minds. Probably not one of the summons you would expect on this list, Carbuncle has always held a special place in our hearts for a few reasons. First off, his ability, Ruby Light, casts a reflect on the entire party. This can be quite valuable if you're facing off against an enemy or boss that uses lots of magic. The second reason, he's adorable. I mean, just look at this little guy. Aww. You wouldn't think a cute little critter like this would be able to cast such a nifty little spell on your party. Carbuncle breaks the mold when it comes to summons. He's adorable, handy, and all around great. Balfour might not be an Aeon that many think of as one of the all-time greats amongst the pantheon of Final Fantasy summons, but it holds a special place in our hearts because it helps introduce the mechanics and complexity of these creatures in Final Fantasy X. Balfour is the first Aeon your group obtains in the game, and it changed the way we thought of and played Final Fantasy. In the past, summons were typically a one-and-done sort of damage-dealing source, leaving after causing massive injuries to our enemies. Not so in Final Fantasy X. Balfour was the first summon that we had replace the team and fight instead of us, which made her all the cooler. It was almost like summoning your own personal boss monster to come out and act as a member of your team. The feeling was almost akin to that in Pokemon when you use your Charmander, Squirtle, or Bulbasaur for the first time. There's somewhat of an emotional connection from when Yuna summons Balfour initially to every time thereafter. It's greeted not only as a tool of destruction, but rather as a friend and ally with a gentle caress on its face from Yuna. Balfour is no pushover and has many weapons at her disposal. The first ability, Sonic Wings, caused delay to enemies, which made them all fall back in the queue line to act. Along with that, Balfour is the only summon to possess 2 overdrives, Energy Ray and Energy Blast. The first would fire a laser that, after a delay, would blast enemies in a line. The second could do more damage, and could even break the damage limits if you had the proper gear, but would come at a longer recovery time. Regardless if you think Balfour deserves a spot on the best of the best summons list, there is no denying that it paved the way for Aeons to be a more mechanically and emotionally impactful pillar of Final Fantasy X. Leviathan. No, not that one. Saying Leviathan's name alone incites both excitement and terror in us. A creature of biblical proportion, the Final Fantasy incarnation is most often seen as a gigantic blue serpent coming from the darkest depths of the sea. His signature attack is Tsunami, or Tidal Wave in Final Fantasy VII, which usually manifests itself as, well, a huge wave. Our favorite version, though, is that from Final Fantasy VIII, which sees Leviathan come out of a portal in which he's entirely made of water, create a cliff, and subsequently cause a giant waterfall to crash down on enemies. Leviathan is one of the few summons that seems like a legitimate force of nature, and that's one of the reasons why we love him. Although his look hasn't changed too drastically over the years, its simplicity is something we've always appreciated. It's a giant sea snake that creates enormous waves to destroy our enemies. We can't ask for much more. In games where adventure and exploration are typically the main goal, we've always felt like it's been a perfect monster to encounter in whatever adventure we're on. It too, like Rama, is also set to be in Final Fantasy XV in some fashion. Here's hoping to eventually fight alongside him as he makes the open world an underwater one. One of the most powerful summons on this list, Odin has been a mainstay of the Final Fantasy series for quite some time, and it's easy to see why. He's the epitome of cool. He's a demonic-looking knight that rides on his faithful steed Sleipnir with saber or lance in tow. In some games, like Final Fantasy VIII, he appears randomly at the beginning of battles to instantly kill all enemies by slicing them in half with Zantetsuken. His appearance in Final Fantasy VII allowed him more flexibility in that he could be readily summoned and would either use his signature attack to decimate foes, or would instead use his Gunge Lance to inflict heavy damage to those immune to insta-kill abilities. Odin is one of the most straightforward and coolest summons in the Final Fantasy series. His visage was one that left an impact on us that will never be forgotten. You may be asking yourself, why is Yojimbo on here when we already had Odin, a summon with an insta-kill sword ability? Good question, but let me explain. Yojimbo is a very different type of summon than what most would expect from the Final Fantasy series. Instead of willfully obeying his master's orders, Yojimbo must first be paid with in-game currency, known as gil. As a sword for hire, Yojimbo's potency on the battlefield can vary widely with his attacks coming in 4 flavors. The first sees Yojimbo let loose his own personal dog of war, Daigoro, to do his bidding for him, for he did not see the player's payment to be sufficient. His second move, Kozuka, has Yojimbo throw a few knives at an enemy. Wakizashi, his third move, has him use his short sword of the same name to deal damage to multiple enemies. Yojimbo's final move, Zanmato, acts as his own version of Odin's Zantetsuken, which will instantly destroy almost any enemy, all because he's satisfied with the offering of adequate kill. Along with these moves, Yojimbo is perhaps one of the most complex summons we have yet to see in a Final Fantasy game due to the various systems put in place to judge the outcome of his attacks. As mentioned before, Yojimbo is a mercenary for hire that offers up his services for gil. Along with that, he also has a base motivation and compatibility that adds extra layers to the Swordslinger. All in all, Yojimbo is a cool samurai that is armed to the teeth, has a pet dog, and has complex mechanics that make him one of the greatest summons in our book. Another staple in the Final Fantasy summoning lineup, Shiva, or the Empress of Ice, is one of our favorite summons for many reasons. For one, Shiva's real-world counterpart, the Hindu god of the same name, is Lord of Creation and Destruction. This is directly tied to Shiva's signature move, Diamond Dust, in which she creates a field of ice and then promptly destroys it. Also, she's one of the few summons that has immense powers but still resembles a human, which makes her somewhat unique. Lastly, her appearance in Final Fantasy X shows her with a certain style and flair. For example, upon summoning her, she immediately throws off her shawl as if to say to her summoner Yuna, "Hold this, human, I have work to do." It gets even better when she uses Diamond Dust to create a frozen wasteland before her, and then pulls a page out of Colonel Mustang's book from Fullmetal Alchemist, snaps her fingers, and destroys the said frozen wasteland. It was really cool, I couldn't help it, to see a character we've known for years be brought to life with some sass and style. With her power, distinct style, especially in Final Fantasy X, and her enduring spirit throughout the series, Shiva will always be one of our favorite summons. If this list was about top 10 summons that belong on the cover of a heavy metal album, Ifrit would be number 1, along with Doom Train. All kidding aside, Ifrit is one of the greatest summons because he's exactly the guy you want fighting with you. He rains down fire and destruction on all of your enemies. Although we love his incarnation in Final Fantasy X due to some parallels one could draw to, say, Arcanine, it's his appearance in Final Fantasy VIII that we truly love. His design truly encompasses a powerful fire-manipulating demon. His attack, Hellfire, has him riding a meteor up from the ground and smashing it like a gigantic flaming volleyball. It's an image we have burned in our minds. Burned in our minds. See what I did there? What more could you ask for? All in all, no matter which game you play, Ifrit is one of the best summons to have at your beck and call. Rama is one of the mainstays as far as summons go in the Final Fantasy series. A mage with a penchant for dishing out damage with thunder and lightning, Rama is one of the greatest summons in our book because every time we see him we feel like we've summoned a living and breathing god. He brings with him all the gravitas and strength that can be expected from a powerful summon. Not only does he bring amazing lightning-based damage in his signature spell, Judgment Bolt, but has also played a major part in both Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy IX, and in the latter of those two he demands a trial before becoming your ally. Our favorite version would have to be his appearance in Final Fantasy VII, which sees him rising up out of the ground, creating a mountain to stand upon, and raining down his own personal style of sentencing to all that oppose you. I'm starting to sense a geoforming theme in some of these guys. Truly one of the most awe-inspiring summons we've ever seen. Also, do we mention that he's set to be in Final Fantasy 15 along with Leviathan? Now that's a summon. We love summoning monsters, and we also love dragons, which makes Bahamut a match made in video game heaven. Widely considered to be the most powerful summon in all of Final Fantasy franchise history, Bahamut has made appearances in almost every one of the games. Known as the Dragon King, Bahamut's ferocity and destructive capabilities are unmatched. This is primarily represented by his signature move, Mega Flare, that is a non-elemental attack that bypasses evasion and defense. There is no escape. It's basically the Hyper Beam of Final Fantasy universe, if Hyper Beam had no drawbacks and completely destroyed everything it hit. Besides going by some other names like the Hallowed Father and the First Sire, Bahamut has also come in many varieties. Neo Bahamut, Bahamut Zero, and even Bahamut Sin in Final Fantasy VII Advent Children the movie, to name a few. Although all those variations are cool, our favorite has to be his appearance in Final Fantasy X, where, upon using Mega Flare, a giant wheel spins up on his back as he gets on all fours and completely obliterates everything in front of him. No matter which style of Bahamut you like best, he is undeniably one of the coolest summons in any Final Fantasy game. Perhaps one of the most unique looking summons on our list, Anima was my personal favorite Aeon in Final Fantasy X. This particular summon brought with it something new to the table with a tragic and fleshed out backstory. For those unaware, the summons in Final Fantasy X, aforementioned as Aeons, are born from a human being who willfully places their soul inside a statue, becoming a faith. Anima is the manifestation of the main antagonist Seymour's very own mother. She would become the weapon that Seymour could use to defeat Sin, who is a giant flying whale. This all sounds pretty convoluted, but the point is that Anima is a creature that had dreams of helping her son, but now suffers due to his hesitation in utilizing her power. Along with all this anguish and sorrow, Anima is able to inflict devastating amounts of damage. Pain is an insta-kill spell to lesser enemies and deals immense damage to those immune to such things. Her signature move is Oblivion, which shows Anima transporting enemies to a dark dimension where her own personal dark side breaks free from chains and unleashes a powerful salvo of explosive punches. In a word, awesome. Anima's striking design, background, and sweet attacks nab her a top spot on our list. Now remember, these are our favorite summons, not necessarily the most popular of all time. Let us know your personal list in the comments below. Don't forget to give us a like, subscribe, and follow us on Facebook, Twitch, and Twitter, and also to share this with any of your friends that are equally Final Fantasy minded like we are. Also, be sure to check out our Disney Infinity 3.0 review if you haven't already, and stop by and hang out with us as Tom plays Tomb Raider for the first time. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.